Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Master Instructor Roundtable. I'm Marty Miller here with co-host, dear friend, Wendy Batts. How are you doing today, Wendy?
I'm great, Marty. How are you?
Good. I wanted to jump into hip mobility today because, one, I'm always working on mine. And two, we listen to our audience. They continue to ask questions about the importance of hip mobility and how to improve it, what restricts it, and all these fun things. So figured, why not jump back into this amazing topic here, and hopefully, well, I'm not going to say hopefully, I know all our NASM family here are going to walk out with some great information that they can use in their sessions immediately.
I absolutely agree with that. And Marty, but before we dive in, I do want to let our listeners know that we are super grateful, as always, to have you guys listening to us each and every week. Marty and I love the feedback that we get, whether it's through our social media channels or via email. However, we want to learn a little bit more about what you want us to talk about versus what Marty and I think you guys want us to talk about, and then also want to find ways to improve. So if you look in our show notes, you're going to see a link, and in that link, it's a survey. And if you take the time to answer the survey questions, you have the opportunity to win a $100 gift card to Amazon. And I wish you all the best of luck, but we really hope you take the survey, and can't wait to see what you have to say. So sorry, Marty, I wanted to jump in and say that before I forgot, because it's super important. But yes, hips are important. The hips don't lie. Shakira says it.
I just knew it. I knew you were going there.
So today we're going to talk about the importance of hip mobility. I know, Marty, you and I have talked a little bit about this in other episodes. However, it's important to keep bringing it back and taking a little different spin based on some of the questions we've gotten. So we are going to talk about the importance of hip mobility. We're going to discuss how hip mobility is correlated with injury prevention as well as performance. And then we're going to always talk a little bit about the anatomy and how, if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing and the muscles aren't in ideal position, how it can limit your hip mobility altogether.
No, I think this is going to be critical, because if you're locked up in the hips, I've improved mine, you will see a difference throughout your workouts and movement, but you can improve it for sure. So leading right into that, maintaining good hip mobility allows for efficient movement patterns, reduces the risk of imbalances and injuries, supports proper biomechanics and alignment, facilitates the things we do in everyday activity, our ADLs, definitely aids in injury prevention and rehabilitation, and promotes overall comfort and ease of movement.
I don't know what else to say about that, except for you need internal and external hip mobility for sure. We need flexion and extension in order to propel ourselves forward and to sit. And I think when you're looking at these different pictures, you can see that. I just got back recently working with some of these golfers that are youth. So ages of anywhere from 14 all the way up to 18. And they were doing kind of the masters for the youth athletes in golf. And it's amazing to see how restricted some of these golfers were in internal rotation. And that's super important, especially in the swing, because you're going to need that in order to really try to maximize your connection with the ball, the limits. If you're locked up in the hips, it's going to really take the toll on your lower back. And we're going to talk about the statistics here in a little bit about the lower back and what we're finding. So you definitely need it in rotational sports. You can see pickleball. Of course, Marty's more into the pickleball. I'm more into tennis. And we want to make sure we do that because, again, think about clubhead speed for the golfers. Think about the power output when you're using any kind of racket. And then just in everyday life here, as you can see, this person's limited a little bit probably in their calves and while their feet are externally rotated. However, in order to ideally squat, you're going to really need hip internal and external rotation, as well as flexion and extension, in order to get the ball and socket moving within the hip capsule correctly. And in order to do the squat, to limit compensations.
Yeah, and there's something called the kinematic sequence, and we've gone through that in other podcasts, but the hips are going to be a huge generator of force. So that's why you need to be able to get to internal and external rotation.
Yes, indeed. So as we know, this is statistics that you found in your CPT textbooks. You're seeing it all in research. You see it on the news. It's everywhere. But it's estimated that 70 to 80% of the world's population is going to experience low back pain at least once. I know people that have had it multiple times, and it's one of those chronic things because they've had it for so long, but of which 85% is non-specific low back pain, meaning people have no idea why they have back pain. They didn't go and lift a heavy box the wrong way. They didn't get out of their car the wrong way. They didn't sleep some weird way. But when you're looking at what people do on the day-to-day, that's when we're seeing common compensations when we're doing some of our analyzing and our assessments. And most of it is because people are sitting in front of their computers, or they're sitting down longer in order to do their jobs, or just in life. And with this prolonged sitting, that's where we're seeing more of these issues within the back, because they're not sitting with ideal posture, whether they're in a flexed rounded position, or maybe they're anteriorly pelvically tilted because their hip flexors are tight for a longer period of time. Both of those are common compensations now. When I know, Marty, you and I 20 years ago, we saw more of the anterior pelvic tilt with most of our clients that were coming in a seated position. However, I've seen a change a little bit in probably the last few years with people coming in with a posteriorly pelvic tilt because of the way that they're actually in that seated position at their desk.
Yeah, most people spend far too much time sitting, and then sometimes they take that movement that they're doing all day, then they drive to their gym, then they do seated leg extension, seated leg curl. So we have to break that chain of movement in that seated flex position. And we'll talk a little bit about the squat later, what happens with hip internal rotation. You do need it even to get into a good squat. So it's critical, because you see also people who are very chair bound try to do higher intensity exercises, plyos, jumps, squats, all that motion with a lack of hip internal rotation. And then they wonder why sometimes they have bad experiences coming out of a workout program.
Yes. Well, you and I cannot go one webinar or podcast, whichever you want to call this, without talking about the importance of assessments, guys. Assessments give you the key to unlock the door for success for your clients, because if you're not assessing, you're guessing. If you haven't heard that before, you need to go back and listen to every one of the other podcasts prior to this, because the assessment, especially something as simple as an overhead squat assessment, if you properly put someone in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, you have them raise their hands right then and there, even before movement, you may start to see compensations occur before they even do anything in the dynamic movement pattern. However, once you do have them go into a squat, you're going to use your solutions table. You're going to look at the muscles that are causing those, which are the overactive muscles, and then allowing those compensations to happen, which are the underactive muscles. And so you can see so much information by just doing the overhead squat. It doesn't have any other outside equipment, which is why we really talk about the importance of doing this one. Most people can do some sort of squat, and you get a ton of information from just this one assessment alone.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to do one thing, this is great. We also love the single leg squat, of course, because in athletics, you're moving around on one leg. But, you know, Wendy, you and I remember back in the early days that people thought we were crazy to assess movement back in the early 2000s. And now it's become the norm. So it's great that the industry has kind of caught up to where NASM was 25 years ago. But you have to do movement assessments, whether they're formal, where somebody knows they're getting assessed, or even what I kind of call tricking people into it that maybe don't think they need to do an assessment, getting them to do body weight squats. And then, of course, every single set of every single exercise someone's performing is a movement assessment. So just keep a keen eye out for what you're seeing, and that will, without a doubt, help you design the best programs possible.
Yes. So once you get that information, I am a huge advocate. Marty, I know you are as well. Again, this is us diving a little bit into the corrective exercise. So if you don't have your corrective exercise specialist, I tell you guys, the information you learn from here is going to far exceed what you possibly think it could. It's not just about the anatomy itself, but it lets us have a different type of approach of other assessments that we can use to really hone in on the information that we gathered from the overhead squat or even the single leg squat, because it gives you a variety of assessments that you can do with your clients that will then help you identify, is it the overactive muscle that's allowing that compensation, or the underactive muscle that is, allowing the compensation with the underactive, or is the overactive one causing that? And so therefore we can be very specific, and we've talked about this, very specific in your program design. And so when you're designing a program, if I have more information, I can really target a lot sooner. So therefore, when the body starts to adapt to the changes I'm trying to get it to do, it happens quicker because I'm very specific in what I'm targeting. And so when you're looking at the information and you really dive into the corrective exercise, these are some examples that you're going to see within that content of, okay, if I saw that the feet went out or the knees went in, or I had something going on at the hip, if you look into your textbook, it'll say, do these few mobility assessments that take no time at all. And then they either pass or fail that information. And so I think just being able to do one of those and then piggybacking it off of the different type of mobility assessments, you're going to be super, super informed because you're just gathering more information, but it can be very specific on what was the issue of why that compensation occurred.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun part of the continuing education process, getting to learn more, layering your knowledge based on what you've learned in the past. And that's why the CES is there. Because, you'll learn a ton from the CPT. There's no question. You'll be great and ready to go out and assess people. But when you want to take that next layer to get even more specific, so you can really hone in on what you need to do and get maybe faster or even better results in changing someone's movement compensation, I think that that's the critical thing behind it. And layering in these mobility assessments don't take much time at all, but it just continues to narrow the focus on specifically what you need to do with your clients.
Absolutely. So when we talk about the importance of hip mobility and we're really thinking about ways of testing it, this is one thing that I do want to point out. When you go into the corrective exercise textbook, or you go onto the videos, or you're looking at this, you're going to see that this person's doing the modified Thomas test. However, she's not really doing it correctly. And this has been brought up to the people that have designed the textbook to change this picture, because technically the top of the tailbone should be at the edge of the table. And as you can see in this picture, she's more on the table than off of the table. And so therefore, if you are going to do the modified Thomas test, whether you're stretching it or you're using it as a mobility test, scoot that client forward. So top of the tailbone is where they would go back and lay down on the table. They are going to have their legs bent. Now, this individual, she's pretty mobile, because I know a lot of my athletes, and Marty, you've seen this too, they're not like this. They lay down and the floating leg is like straight out to the side, or it's, they can't bend their knee when they're in that position. And so therefore their knee's not bent. They're gone into some sort of abduction, maybe even external rotation. So it's interesting just alone to see how they get into that position and then where they are compared to ideal form. So when you look at the picture here, of course, we've talked about this being a passive type test. You can get a ton of information from this, but we're looking at hip extension. So we're seeing what's happening at the psoas. We're looking at hip abduction. So we're assessing the length of the TFL. And then we're also looking at knee flexion and where it is at the rectus femoris length, meaning can they go into a 90-degree angle at the knee? So you're getting a ton of information just from this one position alone.
And that's what I love, those big bang for your buck, because a lot of times you got just a few minutes to assess a client, and then you can lead this right into a manual stretch if you have those skill sets. But again, Wendy, you did a great job with that overhead squat, couple simple range of motion tests like this, mobility assessments, and you've got a lot of information to move forward with to get an exact program that's going to give your client the best results possible.
So then when we're looking at the adductor test, you know, these are just some examples of the mobility assessments that you're going to see. Again, this is passive. You're having your client lay down. They put their foot on top of the side of their leg, almost close to their knee. And then you just have them drop their knee to the side. And if their knee can lay flat, then it's a pass. If they can't, so you look at the bottom picture, she can't get her knee or leg to lie flat, it's a fail. And so it just lets us know exactly what we need to do, because if we don't have the mobility there, then we can look at our solutions table. Again, I'm telling you where to find the answers if you don't know, or if you go into your CES, we break it down even more. But, you know, when you're looking at internal, external, abduction, adduction, when we're looking at all of these different types of muscles, it's really hard to know what's tight and what's not. And so these are super, super simple things that you can do. And the client, it doesn't take any time for the client to do that. So here's just another example of something that you can do with your client.
Yeah, and for those of you just joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, Marty Miller here with co-host Wendy Batts. We are talking about the importance of hip mobility. It's a key part of human movement. Many people today, due to a lot of reasons, but primarily being in a seated position for extended periods of time, have lost hip mobility. And we're just going through the anatomy, doing some talk about the overhead squat assessment, and then going into our mobility assessment, so you can truly isolate what needs to be targeted. And that way you can get these clients' hips moving better, and then they can decrease back pain and increase their performance.
Indeed.
So Wendy, I can go over this one here. So the internal rotation test, as you would say, in the past, this would have been a big fat fail for me. So I was waiting for you to say it on the last slide, but you know, you left that out.
I can do the other one. It's this one and the next one that.
Right. Right. So this is kind of like the windshield wiper test in a sense, right? So you're going to have your client lying prone on the table or on the ground, and it's a passive. You just ask them to let their legs fall out. The client will put their legs together so the knees are in line with their hips. Bend the knee to 90 degrees, and then they'll just passively allow their feet to spread apart while maintaining that 90-degree bend. And what you're going to see, if it's very easy to see without a goniometer, because it's a very simple angle, right? Straight down and straight parallel with the ground of the table is your 90 degrees. On right and left, their legs should fall to 45. The key thing, don't get distracted with the foot. Look at the tibia. That's what we're measuring, because sometimes you'll see external rotation of the foot. They're trying to gain more range of motion. Make sure you really focus on that tibia. And I think we can all eyeball what halfway is between our horizon, you know, and our vertical axis. Very simple, very easy. And don't be shocked if one is different than the other, but both are tight.
But even just looking at her in this position, I mean, she can't even get her arms down all the way. She's got a huge anterior pelvic tilt right there. So there's a lot of information I can even get that maybe I didn't gather when they were doing the dynamic movements. So all of this in my way is, yes, can they note that? But then too, what else am I seeing when we're just trying to put them in this position? And guys, I'm telling you, I honestly believe more people are having issues with hip internal rotation than anything. And it's so important, especially when you're working with athletes. So when you're thinking about sports and performance, that's what you need when you're changing direction or when you're trying to cut, because the hip internal rotation is going to help you decelerate, but it's also when you're loading that's going to help for that powerful reacceleration. So when you're going from that motion, you're cutting, and then you're trying to powerfully go off in a different direction, it's crucial that you have really good hip internal rotation. If not, you are going to definitely start compensating. So this applies to everyday people. This applies to Marty and I. It applies to your athletes. It's super important. And this is one way of doing it. When you're face down, you're going to see the next slide. We also measure it. If somebody doesn't want to get into that position, like a prone position, we do it in a seated position. So when we go to the next one, you can see, you just have them put their legs off of the table. If they put their legs together and then they bring their feet out, again, we're looking at what's happening internally. And then you can also do external rotation as well, meaning that their toes, their leg is going to fall inward. So two different ways. They're just bringing them out and inward. You're looking again for that 45-degree angle, and it's going to let us know if somebody can do this. And it's just another way of measuring it, just in a different position.
And when he just has a little tease for why the CES is so important, if you count it real quick, the first one was a passive, right? Gravity is taking us into it. This one is an active. So there could be a difference. Passively, they could show good range of motion, and actively they may not. Well, what would that be? Well, actively, you're actually making the muscles show, do they have the strength to take you into that range of motion? So these are those little differences. Now, you can use one or both, but sometimes I like to use both to see, do they have if they pass passively, I still may do the active to see if they're strong enough to move themselves with those little rotator muscles, those 6 rotator muscles of the hip. So kind of like geek out on a little cool science here, but that's why we have the CES.
Yes. And you'll be shocked too, the differences in some of these.
Mm-hmm. So Wendy, when we were discussing, I'm like, we have to give some takeaways, some of the best exercises. There's so many, and there's so many people out there putting out good content on hip mobility now. But, if you want to cover, I was trying to find the other image of the adductor magnus foam roll where you sit on it. But if you want to kind of start with that and then go through these, and we'll see if there's any other ones that we want to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to look at what does the client need? What is their assessment showing you? And then when you do these mobility assessments, you're going to be able to gather even more information. So if the adductor complex is in a overactive or shortened position, it's going to say that knee valgus happens. You're going to see the knees shoot inward. And then when you do these different battery of mobility assessments, it's going to either say yep or no. So if it does show that the adductor complex is overactive, of course, we want to downregulate those muscles, and then we want to statically stretch them. So you can see in the first image, she's going through and she's foam rolling until she finds a sensitive or tender area. She's just going to sit and marinate on that for 20 to 30 seconds or until the pain is reduced, and then she'll move on to the next spot. Now, to Marty's point, the adductor magnus is one of those muscles to me that if you're limited in hip, especially internal rotation, that muscle specifically on the posterior fibers are super locked up, and that attaches directly to the pelvis. So we want to make sure that we get in there. I manually can go in and do it. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that, even as a manual therapist, because you're getting to know the client very well and they have to trust you. However, there's this sphere you can use. I don't like to necessarily go directly into a lacrosse ball because the smaller the implement, the deeper it goes. However, you want them to be able to get that implement up towards the inner thigh, right next to the pubic bone, and then find it. As soon as they find it, they're going to know. So it's easier to be in a seated position while you're doing this. And then at that point, they just kind of move the ball around until they nail it. And it's just like the piriformis. If it's lit up, they're going to find it immediately. So foam roll first, then statically stretch. I see you've got the world's greatest here, done in a lot of different varieties of ways. Some people do it with a straight arm. Some people have a 90-degree arm. Again, whatever way you want to teach that. I love this stretch because it does stretch a lot of different things. It is more of a dynamic stretch if you have it continuously moving. I tell them to get in those positions and hold if needed. They can put their knee down. They can stretch their hip flexors. They can really go up and stretch their pec. Of course, they're just getting good mobility throughout all ranges of motion. And then, of course, Marty's got the last one there where they can do, again, more dynamic movements or static movements. But all of the information in your assessments tells you where to hone in on those overactive muscles. And then immediately you're going to go in and activate the underactive muscles to help restore better, won't be ideal probably from the start, but better range of motion each and every time someone does this until they do get that ideal range of motion.
Yeah. And I think, for years, people understood rotator cuff stability, rotator cuff movement and warm up and programming. Hips, it's a ball and socket joint itself. So if you've been kind of doing this with your rotator cuff to prevent injuries and all of that, similar concepts are going to apply with the pelvis. It's going to be different, of course, but you do have a ball and socket joint, which means it's very dynamic, which means there's going to be a lot of muscles that are congruently in that hip to allow that motion and provide some stability. So that's why it's so important to not just warm up your rotator cuff. When you're doing lower body, treating somebody with low back pain or discomfort, you have to address the multiplanar motion of the hip.
Indeed. So Marty, you and I could talk about the hips all day. And we just often see so many people with, their outer hip. It's just weak. Their glutes are weak. Their hips are tight. So we want to really pinpoint what muscles are tight, which ones are weak. We want to make sure that we realign the kinetic chain, because as we know, if one thing is messed up, no matter where it is in the body, it will affect something else above and or below it, or both. And so we want to really look at how good someone's hip mobility is. So take what we said throughout this. If you have not gotten your CES, guys, I'm telling you, it was one of the best courses that I've ever taken. And I know I shouldn't say that, but I really believe that and the PES are my two favorites because of what I personally do. However, I feel that if you have a good way of looking at someone's body and really honing in on what needs to happen in order to make them move better, they're going to perform better and they're going to feel better. It's a win for both sides. If you're not comfortable assessing the hip, take the CES. There's a ton of videos that show you exactly how to get them into positions and then how to say yes or no, does pass or fail. They did a remarkable job on the videos trying to help someone like me that's a very visual learner understand how to do these without having to use a goniometer, which is also great. Again, goniometer, the human protractor. And then again, there's different ways and ideas within both the NASM CPT and CES that will help you improve hip mobility. You just want to know how deep you want to go into that to help someone be able to restore proper range of motion.
Yeah, it was a great wrap up, Wendy. You know, if you're not comfortable with assessing the hip, get comfortable with assessing the hip. Put that on your to-do list, because I promise you, every single one of your clients are probably showing some compensation there. You just may not be identifying it yet. So, you know, hopefully you'll have a couple key motivators from this, and you'll be on the journey to understanding hip mobility much better. So, Wendy, if you could wrap up here and give all these amazing friends and NASM family members of ours your contact information.
Yes. If you guys want to contact me, you can email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or you can find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13.
My information's right here, dr.martymiller72 for Instagram and marty.miller@nasm.org. So make sure you reach out. Wendy, great information as always. And for all of you, thanks for joining. But Wendy, before we depart, do you want to give them that survey information one more time?
Yeah, I just want everyone to remember, if you look in the show notes, click that link, take the survey, and get yourself an opportunity to win a $100 gift card to Amazon. Who doesn't love that? But Marty, as always, thank you for your expertise, especially on the hips. And, you know, if you guys have the Shakira "Hips Don't Lie" song the rest of the day in your head, then it just shows you how important, how much you want to think about the hips. And yeah, it's a good day.
Great stuff, Wendy. Thanks everyone for joining this week. But most importantly, we'll see you again next week on the Master Instructor Roundtable.